My name is Alexei Bruni, and I am concertmaster of Russian National Orchestra.
I'm Stanislav Gusev, director of Yorlov Choir.
I'm Bobby Militello, and I've been with Dave Brubeck for about 15 years now.
I'm Mark Blakey, and I'm a tenor.
My name is Olga Gridneva. I am a singer of cappella.
My name's Kevin Days, and I've been singing with the Brubeck organization for about 13 years.
My name is Valery Polivanov. I am percussionist in Russian National Orchestra.
I'm Jan Kratov. I'm baritone in Yorlov.
My name's Randy Jones. I played drums with Dave Brubeck for probably the last 18 years.
My name is Jack Six. I'm the bass player with the Dave Brubeck Quartet.
I am Masha Mashulia, soprano at the Moscú.
My name is Russell Gloyd, and I serve as Dave's conductor for the orchestral and choral performances.
And I'm Dave Brubeck.
Hello. On behalf of the embassy, welcome back to Moscow.
Thank you.
How's it feel to be in Russia again?
I just got here, but it feels good.
Good. We're glad you're here.
I wrote this Mass to hope because I firmly believe in the goodness of mankind, and to perform it here in Russia was an extraordinary experience. We are fortunate and happy to be in Moscow to play some concerts. One is with my jazz quartet, and the next night we are with the symphony and the chorus, and Mr. Gloyd will be the conductor.
It's amazing how many people we have run into that were there at the Russia Hall 10 years ago. It seems that every meeting that we have, they preface it by saying, you know, I was there 10 years ago.
The success of those 1987 concerts led to the invitation from the White House to perform at the summit between Presidents Reagan and Gorbachev here in Moscow in the spring of 1988.
Louis Armstrong, the great American trumpeter, was asked to provide a definition of jazz. And man, he answered, if you gotta ask, you'll never know. No one tonight needs to ask about the music of another great American jazz artist, pianist Dave Brubeck. Essays about music being the universal language of man. And instead of giving you a fancy quotation, I thought I'd just say this. While you were playing, Dave, I was looking around the room. There were quite a few members of both delegations who just couldn't resist tapping their feet.
You're playing with the Russian National Orchestra and Chorus your own composition, right? And it's called Mass to Hope.
Right.
A celebration.
Yes.
What's the message?
I would like them to walk away thinking there is much hope left in this world if we will behave properly. The first time we went to Russia, it was the beginning of Glasnost. And there was all this excitement with people and expectations for a new life and culture being freer, everything being freer. This time, I saw things I couldn't believe.
The orchestra had recommended 3 separate choruses. The first chorus I heard, I was very unhappy with. The second chorus, the director was very unhappy with the idea of doing the music. He held the score much in the same way that an engineer would hold contaminated nuclear waste. He just couldn't get it back to me fast enough. So I knew that wasn't going to be right. And I thought, what are we going to do? And they said, well, this chorus is rehearsing with another orchestra. And we went to the hall, and I heard them doing their warm-up. And I heard this dynamo individual absolutely drilling them on the music just before this rehearsal. And I went, yep, that's my man.
The Ural choir has a very long tradition, and it has been in existence since 1901. It began as a choir composed of the workers in the factories and plants around the Moscow. Of course, it was a wonderful opportunity to perform this music, but it wasn't without problems. This combination of classical and jazz does not come easy to some people. As for me personally, I'm quite familiar with Dave Brubeck music. When I saw Brubeck 10 years ago in Russia Concert Hall, you know, all I can say is that I was in ecstasy.
I was introduced to Gusev, and I was trying to explain to him about who Mr. Brubeck was and that this was his mass, and he took the score in his hands and he held it up to his heart and he said, I will take very good care of Mr. Brubeck's child. The first rehearsal that I had with the chorus, the very first sound I heard was exactly that. It was a sound. It was this huge, fat, thick, absolutely powerful sound. And I couldn't understand one word they were singing. And I thought, oh, you know, where am I going to go from here? Then, to double that, the idea of me correcting something and then not really knowing if the translation is accurately representing what it is that I want fixed. Then I go through the doubt of, okay, was it mistranslated, which is the reason they're still doing it the way that I don't want them to do it, or it was translated correctly and they just can't do it.
There needs to be less accent on everything except that first beat. Везде поменьше акцентов, за исключением только первой доли, первый танц. That's the pulse. If it's de ba 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 ba, then you have no place to go with the accent. Если вы будете делать на каждом акцент, тогда не будет понятно, что везде акцент.
This music is very different. We have not sung jazz before. I am liking it a lot. The rhythms are very complex. At first difficult, but how do you say it, very contagious. And we started to enjoy it. Of course, the biggest problem has been the language, singing in English. Many times we see foreign choirs come here, and they sing Russian with such an accent. Well, we all laugh, but now I can see how hard it is. This sound of the English are very unfamiliar to us.
Because of the spontaneity that is required, you can do repetitions of a piece, but you never should be in a position to say, well, you know, that performance sounded like, you know, the performance last week or the performance a year ago. Each performance has its own personality. And some of the shadings that I had to deal with, especially with the chorus, how much of the pronunciation would I fix?
Right. Let me just hear you speak on the bottom two measures, last two measures. 3, and. That's close. That's good. But get that Z sound.
How much of that do I conform to what I think should sound right versus the fact that we're not doing this in Oklahoma City. We're doing this in Moscow. And that's what is special about this performance, is it takes their tradition and merges it with Dave's music.
Okay, now, bottom page.
Some of the choirs were not sure about doing Brubeck's music.
I want that to explode at B. I want it to explode. Just
in general, everyone knows Brubeck's music, but some of our members were cautious at the beginning of the rehearsal.
And the other thing is that it's not like this, because if you do, you will be the only ones that are not smiling.
Later, in working with the music, they got to know it and felt more comfortable.
Coming in to hear the choir for the first time, that choir just knocked me out. The Russian basses, the soprano, the entire choir was just beyond belief. I knew right from that moment that it was going to be a great performance.
So, ladies and gentlemen, may I formally introduce to you the composer, the performer, and the birthday boy, Dave Brubeck. And more important than Dave Brubeck,
и более важная вещь, чем Дэйв Брубек.
Mrs. Brubeck. Okay, now quickly go to All My Hope.
I was familiar with a lot of Russian music. It was because of Shostakovich that I wanted to become a composer. I was so glad that I had the opportunity to go there and actually perform with these great Russian singers. The choirs in Russia, the basses are unbelievable, and the great Russian musicians. You see, jazz has always been the voice of freedom, and it continues to be, this day, the voice of freedom. I remember playing in Warsaw with some of the greatest Cuban jazz players I ever heard, but they told their government they were playing Cuban folk music. It was really against the law to listen to my music, but the doctors throughout Russia had figured out a way to take jazz from the Voice of America, and they could put it on X-ray plates. And for some unknown way that I don't know of, they could make a recording on the X-ray plates. And they used to call it bones and music. It was against the law, and if they got caught listening to one of these so-called recordings, they could end up in Siberia or worse. That's how I started to become quite well known in Russia, was illegally.
Is a splendid jazz composer and very joyful man, and we are very proud to take part in the concert with the greatest Dave Brubeck. We know Brubeck's creation, but Capella doesn't perform such a style of music. It's different for us, but we very like this music, and we enjoyed working with Dave Brubeck. It was very exciting, and repetitions were unforgettable.
To be invited to come to the conservatory in Moscow was something that you can't believe, because the great Russian composers had all been students in this exact conservatory. It was a great thrill because I think there were about 350 composers and musicians, but the street outside was so full of other musicians that they had to block the traffic. That's how many Russian musicians were interested in jazz and what we were doing.
Mr. Brubeck, I want to play jazz, but my mother tells me that at first I must study to play classic music. Is it so important?
Is your mother here? Stravinsky said composition is selective improvisation. The great classic musicians had to be able to improvise or they weren't considered great. Mozart, Bach, Beethoven. The reason Beethoven was accepted by Mozart was not for his composition, but Mozart walked away to the next room and left Beethoven alone in the room. Beethoven started improvising. He came back into the room and said, "This man will make a great noise in the world." Wasn't from his composition. It was from his jazz. Okay?
Mr. Brubeck, for me you're just like an angel who came from the skies. Because I really consider you to be one of the greatest musicians I've ever heard. And you are my favorite pianist, jazz pianist. I'd like to ask you about your partners. Two of my favorite saxophonists, Jerry Mulligan and of course Mr. Paul Desmond. Could you tell us about their role in your life? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Because you have mentioned Paul Desmond and Jerry Mulligan, I would like to try to remember a piece I wrote for Jerry Mulligan. Jerry Mulligan was my very close friend and died not long ago. I've never played it before in public. It's called Goodbye, Old Friend.
предложить господину Брубеку показать свою импровизацию на какую-нибудь русскую тему. Например, мы все знаем импровизацию Вана Клайберна.
Could you do an improvisation on a Russian theme? And he gave us an example of Van Cliburn's Moscow evenings, what is that, Moscow nights.
The first rehearsal with the orchestra gave rise to some very interesting problems because this is music that is out of their normal sphere. Matter of fact, people were coming up to me saying, we've never played anything like this in our lives, and most of them would have been thrown out of conservatory had they played it.
Let us start with Blue Rondo.
It was a challenge for them, and it took stopping every few measures. We're in the United States. Sometimes you don't even have to correct. All they have to do is hear it once, and they go, oh, okay, that's the style, because they're so accustomed to it. Here, they've never heard it before. My challenge was to make it sound fresh, to make it sound natural, and not forced.
That dotted quarter is just a little too long.
The Russian National Orchestra was born 7 years ago. In 1990, it was a very difficult time. Nobody knows the future of the culture in the new Russia. It was a brave thing to start an orchestra truly independent of government. Most of our musicians have never played jazz, so there was some adjustment to the rhythm pattern. They had to learn how to swing. I like this music because it has a feelings of happiness and life. I myself love and need all forms of music, classical, jazz, folk, all kinds. What matters is that it is done with talent.
Is to be a little more forward.
It took a long time. It was not easy for them. They were very quick learners, but they had to learn. Nothing was natural.
Working with the orchestra here was so exciting because they were so excited. I mean, and it was very genuine and very apparent. And the same for the choir, you know, it was very exciting, very moving experience. The timpanist, who was really sensational, was so insecure and is such a shy man, but those parts were all played impeccably.
To speak about Dave Brubeck is both easy and difficult. It is easy because all the words about him are either good or very good. And it is difficult because he is a living legend. As a percussionist, I'm very interested in his complicated and various rhythms. His music reflects his soul and character.
Okay, break.
I have grown up with this music. Now my son is listening this duet, and I think it will go on.
I first met Russell Gloyd when I played with the Dallas Symphony. I knew this was a musician I could communicate with. He said, "Oh, well, I know every note of your music." He knows a lot of it better than I know. And I wrote it.
The first time all the forces came together, we were in the rehearsal facilities of the Russian National Orchestra. There was physically no way that we could have the orchestra, the chorus, the quartet, and the soloists occupying the same space. So I was basically into swivel conducting. The two male soloists are soloists that have done the work many times with us in the United States. I could have easily brought over a soprano from the United States as well, but I wanted to have a Russian presence on stage as a soloist in addition to the chorus and the orchestra. I felt that was really important. And the orchestra had recommended her. They actually, I heard about 6 sopranos, and they were all sensational. But there was something about Masha, there's something about the way her eyes told me that she not only knew the music, but she knew something deeper. And that is what brought me to choose her, was the depth of her communication. She understood what the music was about, and the results were just tremendous.
I've sung in English before, but only at home for myself. It was difficult to prepare because I had so little time. But preparing to sing the mass was a pleasure because I liked the music. I'm Georgian, but I was born in Moscow. My father loves jazz. I was raised on this music. 10 years ago, when Mr. Brubeck was in Moscow, I went to the concert. It made an indelible impression, and I never imagined that I would ever be able to work with Mr. Brubeck and to sing Mr. Brubeck's music. Until I heard this Mass, I had never heard any of Brubeck's classical works, and I was astonished at the beauty of this music.
Playing the role of a priest like this is not something I've ever done, but certainly it's a very humbling experience and a generous artistic experience. One of the pieces I sing is this beautiful prayer for peace and a call for the ending of violence and vengeance and for our hearts, to turn to peace and forgiveness. So it's a very emotional piece for me, a very healing and important message to bring anywhere. To come to this country is like a manifestation of many of the things I've dreamed about all my life.
I've done the Mass on five different occasions, and it's always been exciting again, and to have the opportunity to do it. This is extraordinary, however, coming to Russia and singing music in praise of God in a country where this kind of thing wouldn't have existed, 5 years ago. I look so forward to the time when we'll all be there and singing in front of an all-Russian audience, sharing this music that it was written with so much love, and to sing a piece about love and hope in a land that's going under so much change is especially exciting for me.
All my hope is in you, O Lord. You are my rock and my strength. This has become lodged in my heart, and I will remember this for a long time.
I did the original recording of this Mass at the National Cathedral in Washington. Then I've done most of the performances of it, and this performance, this being on that stage with that orchestra and that chorus, was one of the most moving experiences I think I've probably ever had. The people in the orchestra were just, I've never felt that kind of warmth and attitudes from these people.
When you first get to play something as inspirational as this, and you put yourself where you belong, your head goes where it is, there's nothing to get in your way, there's no distractions and things like that. It truly does transcend like the normal jazz gig in the fact that you get caught up in the flow of the the honesty and the reality of it. It's trying to say what Dave really wants it to feel like at that point in a mass.
See you Tuesday. Thank you.
The way the orchestra adapted, they attacked it in the same way that they would attack the most complex classical piece, as if it were Stravinsky. And by doing it with that precision, with that enthusiasm, they raised the level of the entire performance.
Well, it's broken. You give me. Sure. You can? I would love that, because this is my favorite case.
You performed in this room in 1988 during a meeting of two presidents, and I have no doubt that if we managed to get somewhere as a result of that meeting, it probably had a lot to do with Dave Brubeck.
Ambassador Collins had a reception for us at Spaso House, and he invited many of the Russian jazz musicians to come and play. The night was full of surprises. Igor Brill and two of his sons played some wonderful jazz. Also, something very surprising was the Shostakovich String Quartet playing Take 5, along with the Russian alto saxophonist. There are so many very great jazz musicians scattered all over Russia. And this is what amazes me, is how did these guys have the experience to be exceptional jazz musicians? But it's easy to know. They listen to the Voice of America, and they, by hook or by crook, they got all of the jazz recordings they could get, jazz manuscripts, and this is going on all over the world. The main reason we were going to Russia was to do my Mass to Hope, and yet they wanted the first half of the concert to be jazz, which is fine with me.
The rehearsals belong to the conductor. The performance belongs to the musicians.
This was the most moving performance that I've ever performed with this Mass.
I could see how nervous the singers were when we started. I could see how nervous a couple of people in the orchestra were. Within 10 minutes, you could see all of that go away. And then you started to feel the sincerity of the piece, even Dave's solos. Now, I know Dave's playing well, and his solos were from that other place.
I did have expectations, and I would say they were fulfilled. Kevin and Mark and Marsha were all fantastic. I was completely bowled over by all three of them.
Was it worth it? For the trips, for the phone calls, for the emails, for the faxes, for the frustrations, for every single detail having to be triple checked as a basic minimum. I was paid in full when I saw Dave's face.